I'll be talking to you today about Alzheimer's disease in the brain. And I want to talk a little bit about an update on how we're doing with Alzheimer's. You heard an excellent lecture already from Dr. Black. Makes my job a little easier. And I also want to talk about what does Alzheimer's teach us about the self, about who we are. When you look at what goes wrong with the brain, how can we think about what is right about the brain? So I'll just, this working? Okay. So Alzheimer's disease, as you know, is the most common form of dementia in the elderly. Over 5 million patients in this country. As we grow older, and you heard this earlier, our lifespan has exceeded the health span of our brain, and that's an issue. So there are over 5 million patients and growing. Baby boomers, 74 million of us getting older. And this brain pathology starts in all of us after 40 years old, with very few exceptions, maybe a few genetically lucky people. Up to 50% of people have Alzheimer's by 85. Current lifespan is already almost 80, so you can think about what an issue this is going to be. Some estimates say that between 2015 and 2020, Alzheimer's can single-handedly crush Medicare and Medicaid. So we need to do a much better job than what we're doing right now. Current drugs are better than nothing. They treat the symptoms. They don't really stop the disease at all. They just help you make the most use of what you have in your brain. And risk factors include, number one, age, family history, which got my attention years ago in terms of genetic and genes involved. Females get it more than males. Head injury, bangs to the head, can increase risk for this disease dramatically. Stroke, another injury to the head. And even emotional trauma. There was a study that showed the people who went through a really tough divorce that was emotionally traumatic or lost a loved one, those cortisol levels you heard about earlier that go up in the brain can start killing neurons. Essentially, any insult to the brain that kills a bunch of nerve cells can start to trigger this disease because the pathology of this disease, particularly the tangles, which choke the inside of the nerve cells, spread throughout the brain. It's a spreading pathology. It's like lighting a fire. What I'm going to tell you is that in most cases of Alzheimer's, this sticky material called amyloid lights the fire. It takes decades for the amyloid to accumulate outside of the nerve cells. The nerve cells react to this amyloid like a match. Then the tangles are like the fire that spreads. So in treating this disease, and you heard a little bit about this already from Dr. Black, you want to hit early, stop that fire from beginning, and learn how to put it out. In the meantime, some of the things we can learn how to do or try to do to reduce risk: physical exercise, at least a brisk walk every day. I included basketball, but some of you notice I'm limping. That's a basketball injury. I learned something that old guys should, when they set picks, should basically set the pick but not roll, so that when you make a spin move at my age, you can end up limping. But anyway, diet's great. Healthy diet, Mediterranean diet, staying socially engaged, not being locked up in the house. Supplements like ashwagandha and cat's claw have direct effects on the amyloid and the tangle pathology, so there's some interesting results there. Also, learning new things. Coming to an event like this is protecting your brain. You're learning new things. This is better than sitting home playing Sudoku. Brain games aren't going to cut it. It's all about learning, because when you learn new things, you not only make new synapses, but you strengthen the synapses and pathways you already have. Sometimes I just play a game with myself where I'll see somebody on TV I haven't thought about in a long time, and I'm trying to remember their name, and I will not stop until I find that neural network, that pathway that will find that name again. So it's all about reinforcing synapses, because in the end, what correlates with degree of dementia in Alzheimer's is loss of synapses. That's the main thing that happens. That's the battleground. Emotional stress can also cause loss of synapses and loss of nerve cells. So meditation, doing yoga, anything that relaxes the brain, relaxes the mind, is going to be useful. And sleep. Try to get 8 hours of sleep. I'm a hypocrite. I don't get enough sleep, but I'm trying harder to get more sleep. But during sleep, it's actually when this short-term information comes in, and it goes into your hippocampus, which is like the thumb drive. To get it now loaded onto the hard drive, the frontal cortex, this happens during the deepest form of sleep called slow-wave sleep. We also know from new work from Rochester, University of Rochester, during sleep, the brain actually squeezes a lot of that protein crap out. So you get all these misfolded proteins and aggregates accumulating in your brain like amyloid, and it's during sleep that a lot of this stuff gets squeezed out. So I think of sleep as mental floss. So if you don't sleep enough, you're not flossing your brain. Now, a lot of people ask the difference between a senior moment and Alzheimer's disease. So here's, some examples. You go into a room, cat follows you in, look down, both looking up at each other. Why are we here? You forget why you did anything. And the dinosaur's there on an island saying, oh, crap, was that today as Noah's Ark is going off? Should have made a note. And this is a real set of signs. Senior center, don't forget. Senior center, remember to turn. Senior center, wake up. Senior center's coming up. Lunch, only $4. So what this reinforces is that as we get older, it's not so much memory, it's learning. It's not paying attention. As we get older, we get bandwidth is filled, we become jaded, we become apathetic. When you're a little kid, everything's a wow moment. Everything's so cool. And as you get older, it's like, so what moments. So if you could be like a kid where every moment's really amazing, right, you'll learn. And then you won't have to forget why you got up to go to the room, although kids do that too. So for example, when you think about JFK's assassination, the space shuttle explosion, Challenger, 9/11, probably most of you remember exactly where you were during 9/11. This is because this had so much of an impact on your emotion that those memories got hardwired. Right? Emotion hardwires memories. This part of the brain evolved together, the first vestiges of emotion and short-term memory into long-term memory. And so the thing is to take a lesson from this and try to make every moment of your day in the moment and passionate about the moment. Now you'll pay more attention, you'll register information, learn it better, and your memory will improve because you're learning better. In Alzheimer's, this becomes impossible because the pathology of the brain starts actually in this area here in the hippocampus. If you'd use Dan Siegel's handy brain stem down here, here's the short-term memory limbic system in the middle, frontal cortex over the top. In the middle here, where there's short-term memory, the pathology starts there, and then it spreads through the brain like a fire, so that even if you want to learn and remember at some point, you can't keep track. So I think this conversation between Alzheimer and the first patient he described in 1906, August Dieter, 55-year-old woman sitting on a bed in the asylum. He's presenting this and tubing in to neuroscientists and psychiatrists. He's presenting to Carl Jung, and he explains this conversation with her. She's sitting on the bed. What's your name, he asks. August, she replied. That's correct. Last name, August. What is your husband's name? August, I think. So she's very confused. How long have you been here? 3 weeks. She had been there 2 days. And then he says she breaks down, she's crying, and she just starts saying to Alzheimer, I have lost myself. I have lost myself. I have lost myself. And that's what this disease is. It's an unraveling of this tapestry of experiences, memories. The entire neural network you've built your whole life is created who you are to people, your personality, how you respond to people. So people know you by a certain personality. This is the tapestry of your neural network that people are seeing. And now all of your experiences of life recorded in your brain are basically unraveled. You lose it. You are stolen of yourself. It's a thief that steals you from yourself and from your loved ones. So it's just an absolutely unacceptable and horrendous disease that we need to stop. If not for the purposes of what a medical problem it is, it's just an absolutely horrendous disease to see someone go through, never mind have. So what really happens is that what's really being impacted first in Alzheimer's is short-term memory. Every moment of the day, right now, you have sensory information coming in, and then it's delivered to the short-term memory area here, the hippocampus, via this big set of cables called the perforant pathway. All your sensory information coming there. And what's happening over time is that this information is trying to get stored in the hippocampus as short-term memory, later as long-term memory, or with enough emotion immediately. But the perforant pathway is gradually being severed. So think about this. You're taking in information, all the sensory information, is trying to get stored in your short-term memory, but the cable that brings it there is slowly getting broken down. So eventually what's happening is you lose the continuity of time. You can't keep track of what happened 5 minutes ago, 4 minutes ago, 1 minute ago, then even 5 seconds ago. So at some point, you are only living in the moment, which, for a lot of us who meditate sounds great, but if you're not there, if there's no self to have a context of that moment, it's no fun. In fact, it's terrifying. You'll see sometimes in Alzheimer's an Alzheimer patient's face that they're terrified because they're in the moment, but they don't, if you can't keep track of what's going on 5 seconds, 10 seconds ago, you're scared to death. So this is just a terrible disease at that point. Sense of self requires that you're constantly integrating new things that are coming into you with what you already know. That's learning, and then retaining that as memory. So a lot of these late-stage patients are basically losing self-awareness. It's a gradual loss of self-awareness. So if you look at the evolution of the brain and mind, you have the brain stem and the handy brain down here. This is the instinctive innate memory. You don't have to do anything to have this. This is automatic, fight or flight, feeding, reproducing, keeping the species alive. And then you have the first vestiges of acquired memory, short-term memory in the limbic system. So this brain stem's 400 million years old. This area here about 100 million years old. And now you're starting to have things like pain and pleasure and fear and desire. Fear being the memory of pain, anticipation of pain. Desire coming from the memory of pleasures and anticipating those pleasures again, the first vestiges of acquired memory. And then this goes on from the emotional self to the intellectual self, where you now are acquiring long-term memories. There's some meaning to your life. You're starting to define who you are uniquely as a person, your purpose, why you're here. You're starting to become creative. This is only 4 million years old, the large neocortex. Alzheimer's is starting in the middle, taking out the limbic section. So now the patient is just stuck with their long-term memories, reverting back to what they were doing 20, 30 years ago, sometimes in delusion, and then eventually that fire spreads to the long-term memories and to who you are as well in the neocortex. So the way I like to look at it is, the brainstem, as we evolve, you see this downgrade of selfishness. This is just a comment on the evolution of our mind, that with the instinctive brain, it's all about self, and it's automatic. But as the brain seems to be evolving, selfishness is going down, and self-awareness is going up as we go toward parts of the brain like the neocortex. And right at that intersection is where the Alzheimer patient is losing it both, and then eventually losing self-awareness. So one thing that helps is music. There's increasing evidence that music can increase and boost self-awareness in Alzheimer's patients. I have a project called Memories Radio, an iPhone app that is an algorithm that would be used to generate set lists for patients to stimulate their brain with music. And I think you'll hear more about the great things about music therapy in another talk later by Chloe Flower as well. Now, what can we learn then about ourselves? Sense of self requires memory. Sensory information has to come in and be put into context in space and time, and this is lost in Alzheimer's, and thus the self is lost because you can't do this. So how do we fix this? Well, it begins with genes. For the first 80 years of this disease, we described it by the pathology, the plaques, the tangles, as inflammation. And then in the 80s and 90s, others and myself in our labs discovered the first Alzheimer's genes, the Alzheimer gene that makes amyloid, which we found back in 1986, the other genes, the presenilins, ApoE, which was found in 93. So these genes then taught us what was going on in the disease, and suddenly we see this basic scenario coming up. Amyloid is accumulating. It causes these tangles to form in nerve cells. The tangles spread like a fire throughout the brain. Follow that blue area on the side. And then there's inflammation. As nerve cells are dying, the brain's reacting to that with inflammation. And actually, inflammation is trying to protect the brain. It thinks there's an infection, all these nerve cells dying, but then it tries to kill the invading infection. There's no infection, so more nerve cells die at this point by collateral damage and friendly fire, and now you have this vicious cycle that's going. To stop it, we need to really, and we heard this earlier, a beautiful presentation this by Dr. Black, that amyloid's occurring 15 years before the symptoms, right? So the first gene we found, I mean, as a student, I found the gene I call the amyloid precursor protein. It's the gene that makes amyloid. And many of us focused on stopping the amyloid, but the problem is, by the time you treat a symptomatic patient, that amyloid already accumulated and did its job. So it's like having a patient with congestive heart failure come to you after a heart attack, and the doctor just says, here, just take a Lipitor. It's not enough. You had to do that 10 years ago to keep the cholesterol levels down, if you buy into that. So we won't go into that. So amyloid then drives tauopathy, that's the tangles, brain cells dying, there's inflammation, then there's dementia. So you have to hit this disease early. So our mantra then is early prediction using genetics, early detection, imaging, biomarkers. We can actually detect this disease pretty well now with imaging and spinal tap type biomarkers 10, 15 years before. But then the question is, why do that if you can't stop the disease? Some people want to know anyway. They do it anyway. But you need to empower the patient, a person who's on their way to this disease. Sometimes you can tell 10 years before with the right therapies. To do that, we said we need more genes. So we started the Alzheimer's Genome Project, which is funded by Cure Alzheimer's Fund, also by the NIMH. Thank you very much, Tom Insel, who is our great supporter in this project. So it's great to see him here. And our goal is to identify all of the Alzheimer's genes. We've now generated 2,300 whole genome sequences, right? The Human Genome Project, the first whole genome sequence cost $2 billion. Now we can get one for $1,000, 10 years later, great discount. So we're generating all this genetic data, and now we're going to evaluate how these genes cause the disease in these different pathways. So as you look here, you see the amyloid pathway up top, the tangles on one side, the inflammation on the other. We can start to sort these new genes into these pathways. Then we work with people like Eric Schott, collaborating with Eric, where he can say, here are the networks and subnetworks of all the different genes that interact with these genes to cause the tangles, the amyloid, the inflammation, and you start to get a big picture of the disease. But better than that, you now have targets. The genes teach you what you need to target with the drug. You just need the system to test it. And up till now, we've used mice, and mice are not great to work with. First of all, they don't recapitulate the disease. It's nasty stuff. You don't want to hurt a mouse if you don't have to. But you know, it'd be nice, and there's a new movement now of 3D culture, growing nerve cells in 3D systems that mimic the brain so that you can actually have a recapitulation in just 6 weeks or 8 weeks of Alzheimer's disease in a dish without having to use a mouse. So we have a paper in press in Nature from our lab. This is work of Do-Yeon Kim and Se-Hoon Choi, where they were able to actually get plaques to form in these dishes, tangles, the full pathology, showing that the amyloid comes first and drives the tangles. In 6 weeks, you get this in a dish. Now you can test these genes and how they affect that and test drugs that target those genes. So you don't have to rely on mouse experiments that take a year or 2 years, where mice just don't recapitulate the disease, even when you put genes in them. This does, because it's human nerve cells recapitulating the brain. So in the end, we're going to need a cocktail to stop this disease that hits amyloid, tangles, and inflammation, and it's shown here. But according to the University of Bordeaux, you just need to drink a glass of red wine now and then. So here's a cartoon. These scientists saying red wine makes them live longer, but they get to be a real pain. And the little mouse says, it has a timid nose with the usual notes of oak and vanilla. And the other mouse says, I can't believe you're drinking Merlot. Now, one last comment. You know, Einstein has a great quote, that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And we always think about genes and drugs and, you know, always chemical structures. You heard the talk earlier by Annabarn, who's now using resonance frequency. So we just set up a collaboration with Annabarn, who's going to send his Prodigy postdoc to us. We're going to try using resonance vibrational frequency, little nanobots, in those 3D cell cultures, mini brains, to see if we can clear Alzheimer's pathology using resonance frequency in that new system we developed. So we're very excited about this new collaboration with Annabarn. Now, finally, in the last minute, as you heard, you know, and I work on Alzheimer's. I wrote Superbrain with Deepak Chopra, which was a real joy, and maybe we can get into some of that in the panel discussion. But I also play music. This is the Jay Leno show. And this is Joe Perry in front looking really cool, and that's me totally bewildered in the back, saying, yeah, I know, I look like a rock star, don't I? So, but anyway, it's kind of fun to do music on the side and just some keyboard work on the last Aerosmith album. But I also like writing ballads, and I wanted to write a song that basically would tell us from the viewpoint of a patient, don't forget me. So the name of this song is Remember Me. It's not published yet. Chris Mann, a very talented vocalist, you might have seen him on The Voice as a finalist. He and I wrote this actually together with our wives. And I'm on piano, Chris Mann is on vocals. And the name of this song is Remember Me. I just want to play a minute or so of it before I end.
I need someone to hold on for me, to what I can't seem to hold on to. The life we used to live is slipping through my fingertips like a thread that's unraveling. suppose that nothing lasts forever, and everything is lost in its time. When I can't find the words that I'm trying to speak, when I don't know the face in the mirror I see, when I feel like I'm lost and alone in this world, won't you please remember me? Remember me. I know there'll come a day when I have gone away, and the memory of me will fade. But darling, think of me and who I used to be, and I'll be right there with you again. I hope I'm one thing worth not forgetting. Tell me that you'll never let me go. When I can't find the words that I'm trying to speak, when I don't know.
For all of you who have been touched by this terrible disease, please know on behalf of all of us doing Alzheimer's research that we will never give up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Rudy, if you don't mind, you mentioned Superbrain, and we all know how well that did with regard to talking about so many of the risks, involved with aging and how to reduce all of that. But your next project with Deepak, Super Genes, and I actually did an interview with you in the past few months, and you were talking about this and mentioned Rudy and your relationship, and we got to talk a little bit about it. Will you please, just, if you don't mind, for a couple minutes, just telling folks about transforming your own biology and this next step of what you and Deepak long-term are working on?
Well, we'll have a panel on this later on, and this is this idea that, even though you're born with a certain number of genes or certain sequences from your parents that predispose you to certain traits or even disease, thanks to epigenetics, which is gene activity, and even modifications to genes chemically that change their activity, we can start to override some of our predispositions. How many of us are born to maybe a parent with a terrible temper, but you don't necessarily have a terrible temper because you've learned in your life with your guides to stay calm and stay cool? Well, genes are changing in you to make that possible long term. And even some of those chemical modifications to genes in other species get transmitted to the next generation. This is probably the most exciting and controversial side of epigenetics. So in the new book, Super Genes, we want to talk about, similarly the way we said in Superbrain, you're not just your brain, you're the user of your brain. Take charge. Same thing with your genes. Don't just give in to what you've inherited. Your lifestyle will also make a difference.
Just so you know, I met Rudy in the men's room at a TED conference, and we were both in the urinal.
No, Deepak, urinals.
TMI.
Urinals.
Huh?
2 urinals.
2 urinals.
Let's be clear, they were separated.
They said the urinal.
And I turned to Rudy, I said,
Yankee Stadium.
Are genes a verb or a noun? And I swear to God, he stopped doing what he was doing. He said, let's go outside and talk. And we started an email correspondence, and here we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.